What if the quietest kid in school unknowingly became the only ally to a mysterious new girl, who isn't just from out of town, but from another world entirely? Secrets, danger, and unlikely friendship collide as two very different teens face threats not just from bullies, but from beyond the stars. Will courage be enough when the truth finally lands? If you're new here, make sure to subscribe for more inspiring sci-fi stories, and show some love with a thumbs up by liking the video. Now, let's jump into the story. Nolan Frost had mastered the art of being invisible. At 17, he'd learned that being quiet wasn't just a preference, it was a survival skill. He drifted through the halls of Harwell High like a ghost, head low, shoulders drawn in, never causing trouble, never attracting attention. His days were predictable. He arrived early, sat in the back of every class, did his homework without complaint, and left before the final bell had finished echoing. Only a few people even knew his name. Most called him that kid in the hoodie. On a gray Tuesday morning, Nolan noticed something odd. The front row desk in homeroom, which had been empty since winter break, was no longer vacant. At first, he thought he was imagining it. But then the classroom door creaked open, and the air shifted. Students paused mid-sentence. The hum of whispered conversations dropped a notch. Standing in the doorway was a girl unlike anyone Nolan had ever seen. She was taller than most of the students in the room, with skin the color of moonlight. Her hair fell in waves, blue as glacial ice, and shimmered under the cheap fluorescent lights. She wore the school's uniform, but it looked like something out of a futuristic novel on her. Silver eyes scanned the classroom with calm precision, not fear. She didn't fidget or look nervous. She moved with a stillness that felt ... controlled, practiced. Class, this is Lisa Roon, Mrs. Everett, their homeroom teacher, said without much enthusiasm. She'd be joining us for the rest of the semester. Lisa gave a single nod, then walked to the empty desk without waiting for an invitation. As she passed, whispers grew louder. Nolan heard someone mutter, "Did you see her eyes?" Another student chuckled and said, "She's gotta be one of those cosplay weirdos." But Lisa didn't seem to hear. Or maybe she just didn't care. Nolan couldn't stop watching her. He wasn't the only one staring, but while others seemed amused or curious, he felt something else, something that tugged at the edge of understanding. She reminded him of the quiet tension before a storm, like the world was holding its breath. It wasn't just her appearance. It was the way she carried herself, the way she sat upright, hands still, eyes sharp, like she was studying everything. And everyone. Like she wasn't just new. Like she wasn't. From here, as the day dragged on, the gossip machine kicked into overdrive. Lisa said nothing in class. She answered a few questions when called on. Her voice was low and even, but she didn't interact with anyone. At lunch, she sat alone at a bench near the back of the courtyard under the shade of a maple tree. Nolan, who usually ate his sandwich in the library, couldn't help but watch her through the window. Her eyes stayed on the sky, her face unreadable. The wind tugged at her hair, but she didn't flinch or shiver. She looked like she belonged to another world entirely. By the third period, someone had already nicknamed her Lunar Girl. Nolan hated that. It wasn't creative. It was lazy. And cruel. Baird, the senior linebacker who ruled the locker hallway with a smirk and a shove, had made it his mission to get a reaction out of her. "Hey, Lunar Girl," he called out as she passed. "Need directions back to your spaceship?" The group of boys laughed. Lisa didn't. She kept walking, her face untouched by the noise. That only seemed to make Baird more determined. After school, Nolan stayed behind to help the librarian reshelve books. It was his usual excuse to avoid the crush of bodies at dismissal. As he pushed a cart of hardcovers past the classroom where Lisa had sat, He paused. The door was still cracked open. She was inside, alone, her back to him. She stood at her locker, staring at something in her palm. It glowed faintly, like a flicker of blue light. It looked like a piece of tech, but unlike anything he'd ever seen. Before he could move or blink, she closed her hand around it, and the glow vanished. She turned and locked eyes with him. Nolan froze. For a second, they just stared at each other. Her expression didn't change. No surprise, no fear. Only a calm stillness, as if she was used to being watched, and maybe even expected it. Then, without a word, she turned and walked away. He didn't sleep much that night. Not because he was afraid, because he was curious. The world he knew, the one filled with homework, awkward conversations, and cafeteria pizza, suddenly felt too small. He kept seeing her silver eyes, kept replaying the moment she looked at him, like he wasn't just another face in the crowd. Like she saw him. Really saw him. Nolan Frost had always been a quiet watcher. But now he wondered if someone else had been watching back. Nolan dreaded gym class more than anything else. It was the one place he couldn't blend into the background. The harsh echo of squeaking sneakers, the shout of whistles, and the clatter of bouncing balls made it impossible to disappear. His usual strategy was to stay at the edge of the court and hope the coach forgot he existed. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. That day, it didn't single quotes T. Coach Ramsey's whistle screamed through the gym like a battle cry. "Frost, you're up," he barked, pointing straight at Nolan with a finger like a hammer. Nolan sighed quietly and walked toward the court, dragging his feet as if that might slow time down. He could already hear the snickers from the bleachers. Baird and his crew were watching. They always were. As Nolan stepped into position, he noticed someone else was joining their team. It was Lysa. She hadn't participated in gym class before, not once since her arrival. She usually stood quietly near the sidelines, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room. Coach must have finally decided it was her turn. They didn't speak as they stood side by side. Nolan wasn't sure what to say to her anyway. The whistle blew again, and the game began. Within seconds, it was chaos. Students rushed across the aisle, court shouting, throwing elbows, and jostling for the ball. Nolan did what he always did, tried to stay out of the way. He caught the ball once, panicked, and threw it too hard. It bounced off the backboard and landed in the hands of someone on the other team. Laughter followed. "Come on, Frost," someone yelled from the sidelines. "It's not dodgeball." Nolan's ears burned. He tried to disappear into the floor. Baird made a fake alien noise and pointed at Lysa. "Watch out, she might use her moon powers." Nolan turned to look at her, expecting to see some kind of reaction. Anger, embarrassment, maybe even fear. But Lysa just stood still, completely calm, watching the game with that same unreadable gaze. And then everything changed. A player from the opposing team launched the ball across the court. It was aimed squarely at Nolan's chest. He braced himself, expecting pain, but before it could hit, a blur of blue hair moved between him and the ball. Say with a single graceful leap. She caught the ball mid-air, spun on her heel, and launched it toward the hoop in one seamless motion. The ball arced through the air and landed in the net with a clean swish. The gym fell silent. Nolan's jaw dropped. Even Coach Ramsey raised his eyebrows. Shot, he muttered. But Lysa didn't gloat. She didn't even smile. She returned to her position like nothing had happened. The game continued, but it had changed. Every time the ball came near her, Lysa was already there, intercepting, passing, scoring. She moved like she'd been doing this her entire life. She didn't shout or shove. She didn't need to. Her movements were so smooth, so controlled, that it felt like watching a professional athlete. Or something more. Baird tried to block her once, tried to trip her. It didn't work. She sidestepped him like a dancer and scored again. The gym echoed with gasps and murmurs. Nolan stayed back and watched, amazed. He'd never seen anyone move like that. Not just with skill, but with purpose. She wasn't playing for fun. She was measuring everything, calculating every move. And the more he watched, the more he was sure Lisa wasn't just athletic. She was trained. When the final whistle blew, the game ended with their team winning by a landslide. Coach Ramsey clapped a few times and said something about finally waking up. But no one was paying attention to him. All eyes were on Lysa. As the students gathered near the lockers, the whispers began again. Did you see that? She's not normal. Maybe she's part of some government experiment. Lisa ignored them. She walked past the chatter like it didn't exist. Nolan waited near the water fountain, unsure why. Maybe he wanted to thank her. Maybe he just wanted to understand what he'd seen. As she passed by, he cleared his throat. "Hey," he said. She stopped and looked at him. "That was incredible," he said, feeling ridiculous the moment the words left his mouth. Lisa tilted her head slightly, eyes scanning his face. Then she said softly, "You stayed calm." Nolan blinked. "What?" "When the ball came at you, you didn't flinch. You." "I kind of froze, actually." She gave the faintest smile. "Still, you didn't run." Before he could respond, she walked away, her steps as silent as falling snow. Nolan stood there, confused, impressed, and somehow honored. It wasn't just that she'd saved him from a bruised chest. It wasn't just that she could have wiped the floor with anyone in the gym. It was that she'd noticed him at all. For once, the quiet kid had been seen. And by someone who, he was starting to believe, wasn't just different. She was extraordinary. Nolan usually walked home alone. He liked the quiet after school, the way the world seemed to exhale once the final bell rang and the chaos faded. But today, something felt different. The sky was overcast, the wind carried a sharp chill, and the path through the woods behind the school seemed darker than usual. It wasn't the kind of change you could see. It was the kind you felt in your bones, like a warning whispered in a language you didn't quite understand. He adjusted his backpack and stepped onto the narrow trail, boots crunching against dried leaves. The woods were a shortcut, one he'd taken dozens of times, but with every step today, the silence pressed in tighter. He was halfway down the path when he heard a faint rustling behind him. At first, he thought it might be a squirrel, or maybe a late student taking the same route. But when he paused to listen, the sound stopped too. He turned slowly, eyes scanning the trees. No one, nothing, just wind swaying the branches. Shrugging off the nerves, he kept walking, though now his pace quickened. The rustling started again, this time followed by a low voice, muffled and unfamiliar. Nolan single quotes as heart thudded. This wasn't normal. He reached into his pocket for his phone. He'd forgotten to charge it last night. Perfect. As he approached the bend in the trail that led toward the street, 3 figures stepped into view from behind the trees. They weren't students. They wore dark clothes, heavy boots, and moved with a strange stillness that made Nolan stop in his tracks. One of them, the tallest, stepped forward. He had no expression on his face, no emotion in his eyes. "Where's the girl?" the man asked, voice sharp and cold. Nolan blinked. "What girl?" The man tilted his head slightly, studying him like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. "The one with the blue hair." "You've spoken to her." Nolan's pulse kicked into overdrive. How did these strangers know about Lisa? How did they know he had even talked to her? "I don't know what you're talking about," Nolan said, trying to back away. One of the other men moved quickly, stepping behind him. "Don't lie," he hissed. "We've been tracking her. She's dangerous." Nolan's mouth went dry. Dangerous? Lysa? She was strange, yes. Different. Powerful even. But not dangerous. Not like this. The man in front lunged forward, grabbing Nolan by the arm. "Tell us where she is," he said through clenched teeth. "Now." Before Nolan could respond or yell, or fight back, there was a sudden gust of wind, and then blur of motion that knocked the man off his feet. Nolan stumbled back as the others reacted, pulling out sleek devices that looked nothing like any weapon he'd ever seen. They glowed faintly at the edges, humming with an energy that made the air around them shimmer. And then she was there. HFY stood between him and the strangers, eyes glowing silver, hair swirling as if charged with electricity. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her presence was enough. The men hesitated, clearly not expecting her to show up. One of them raised his weapon and fired. A thin beam of light shot through the air. Lysa moved faster than Nolan could follow, dodging left, sweeping her leg in. A wide arc that sent the shooter sprawling. The other two lunged at her, but she was already in motion again. Precise, efficient, unstoppable. In less than a minute. All three men were down, groaning, unconscious, or too hurt to move. Nolan stared at her, wide-eyed, heart racing. She turned to him, her breathing steady. "Are you okay?" she asked. He nodded, barely finding his voice. What just happened? Who are they?" Lysa looked at the fallen men, then back at Nolan. For the first time, her mask of calm cracked just a little. "They're not from here," she said. "Like me, you're not. You're really not from here?" She nodded slowly. "I didn't come here to hurt anyone. I came to protect someone important." Nolan took a step back, not because he was afraid, but because the truth was crashing down around him too fast. It was all real. Everything he'd guessed, everything he hadn't dared say out loud, was true. Lysa reached into her jacket and pulled out a small metallic device about the size of a coin. She pressed it, and it lit up, projecting a soft blue glow that hovered in the air. It displayed strange symbols and flickering shapes that Nolan couldn't understand. "They found me," she said quietly. "They'll come back, more of them." "Then why are you still here?" Nolan asked. "Why not run?" "Because running won't stop them," she said. "And because of you." He blinked. "Me. You saw me. Not just what I can do, but who I am. You didn't run. You stood up." Nolan swallowed hard. "I was scared, and you stayed," she replied. "That matters." They stood there in silence for a moment, the woods quiet again, except for the groans of the attackers. Slowly fading. Above, the clouds had parted slightly, letting pale sunlight spill through the trees. Nolan looked at Lysa, his mind still buzzing with questions he wasn't sure how to ask. But he knew one thing for sure. Nothing about his life was going to be normal again. The school gym had never seen anything like it. Streamers of deep silver and glowing blue hung from the ceiling, catching the overhead lights and reflecting them like starlight. Music played softly from unseen speakers, something both familiar and strange, a blend of human rhythms and alien harmonics that pulsed through the air like a heartbeat. It was called the Festival of Two Worlds, and it had started as a quiet idea shared between Nolan and Lysa weeks ago. Now it filled the gym with color, laughter, and something rarer than either. Unity. Nolan stood near the entrance, watching classmates arrive in waves. Some wore ordinary clothes. Others had tried their best to mirror Lysa's world, fashioning shimmering robes, geometric accessories, or even painting their skin with light reactive ink. The teachers had been skeptical at first, but after Lisa's quiet conversation with the principal, a conversation no one else had overheard, the event had been approved. Just once, she said, let them see what peace looks like when two worlds stand side by side. Lisa was already inside, helping string up a curtain of tiny lights across the far wall. Her blue hair shimmered in the glowing strands, and her silver eyes sparkled with focus. She looked lighter, freer, like a weight had been lifted. The weeks following the attack had been filled with questions and quiet fear, but Lisa hadn't disappeared. Instead, she stayed. And now, she was letting everyone see her, not just the quiet girl in the front row, but who she really was. When she saw Nolan, she smiled and waved him over. He walked across the gym, still amazed by how normal everything looked, despite how much had changed. They hadn't spoken much about the night in the woods. After the fight, Lisa had simply said thank you and asked him to keep her secret. He had agreed, without hesitation. Since then, they had grown closer, drawn together by quiet conversations, long walks home, and the simple fact that they understood each other in ways no one else could. How does it look? She asked, stepping back from the lights. Like another galaxy, he replied. She tilted her head. That's the goal. More students arrived, many unsure at first, but curiosity won out over hesitation. At one end of the gym, a table had been set up with food, inspired by both World's Pizza and spiced root cakes, soda and crystal-clear fruit spheres that hovered just above their plates before melting on the tongue. There were games too, some simple, others holographic. And everywhere, conversations buzzed with excitement, surprise, and the realization that maybe being different wasn't something to fear. Nolan wandered through the crowd, watching friendships form in real time. The bullies who once mocked Lisa now stood silently near the snack table, unsure how to approach the girl they once feared. Baird, surprisingly, walked over and nodded at Nolan. She's pretty amazing, he said. She always was, Nolan replied. On the small stage set up at the front of the gym, Lisa stepped forward. The music faded, and all eyes turned to her. She wore a simple outfit from her homeworld low, flowing fabric that shimmered like ocean mist and caught the light in soft pulses. She didn't need a microphone. When she spoke, her voice carried not. Loud but clear. Thank you, she began. Thank you for coming. For being open. For choosing to see, not just what's different, but what's shared. A hush fell over the crowd. I came here with a mission, she continued. I wasn't supposed to be noticed. But then I met someone who reminded me that being seen isn't always a weakness. Sometimes it's a way to connect, to build something better. Nolan felt a quiet warmth rise in his chest. This festival isn't just for fun, she said. It's a promise that even if we're from different worlds, we can meet in the middle. We can learn, laugh, and live together. The gym burst into quiet applause, then cheers. Music rose again, this time louder, more joyful. Students poured onto the dance floor, pulled by the rhythm and the moment. Lisa stepped down from the stage and found Nolan by the edge of the crowd. Dance? She asked. I'm not very good, he admitted. Neither am I, she said with a soft smile. But together we might be. They moved to the music, slowly at first, then more confidently. It wasn't about the steps. It was about the presence, the shared experience of being part of something larger than themselves. As they danced, others joined them. The gym, once divided by fear and rumors, now pulsed with light, sound, and understanding. Above them, silver lights blinked like stars. Somewhere in the universe, Lisa's people were watching, waiting. But tonight, she wasn't a guardian or a stranger in disguise. She was a girl at a school dance, holding on to a boy who had once been invisible and now stood shining in her light dot, and for the first time, it felt like home.